I think that will lead to my next question, because it's very interesting. Often there is a certain amount of instability within the country you're representing, but when you're coming to platforms like the mock UN, you must have a solid position in order for you to I don't know, score points or just be a good diplomat. How do you balance between taking a firm position but at the same time addressing the realities of being an unstable country or going through some kind of unstable situation?
Basically, in my personal experience, what I do is, if the country which I am representing it is, if it's not stable, first I see who my allies are, okay, and what the approach of my country is. So suppose if I'm Philippines, and you know how it's kind of unstable at the moment with the Duterte government, and it's the war on drugs and stuff, but what the national media and what the government is saying. So in UN, nobody talks about facts of their countries, because if they do, their position gets undermined. They always have to do propaganda for their country. So that's the policy which even we are forced to follow, because we can't give away the weakness of the country. We always have to focus on anything positive the country has done regarding that topic. Okay, for example, I represented Chile in the recent Model United Nations, which was held in the United Nations itself in Geneva. So over there, the topic was natural disasters, and if you could know, Chile is a South American country. It's like one of the Latin American countries which is prone to natural disasters. In 2017, it faced the largest wildfire. Okay, so now since we have less infrastructure, we can sometimes use those points as a positive thing and ask the world to help us. And we'll say we are taking steps. We'll also say hey, we don't have enough funds and resources, so therefore please ally with us and help us in doing this. But whatever, since the country is ours, stick to the ground plan which we lay over. So that the countries which are helping us also don't supersede our sovereignty, but at the same time our point is put efficiently over. Basically, stick to the propaganda of the country rather than the facts of the country, because if we stick to the facts of the country, then we are not representing the country. We are technically questioning the country which we are representing.
So I wanted to ask you a question, basically in regards to community building, because one beautiful thing about UN is that it, you guys mentioned earlier, that you could be from some other part of the world representing an entirely different face of the earth, and you are forced to take positions and try to understand and think in the shoes of those people. How would you think this contributes to world citizenship in a sense? How do you think it would affect in terms of giving you perspective on being a world citizen?
So you get to know more about the other countries, the status of the country which you're representing, and basically the other countries nearby, how basically the allies, and who are the allies of your countries, who are against, who are your threats in terms of whether how are you going to face sanctions. Let's say Iran, for example. Now they have faced a lot of economic sanctions from the US because of the nuclear issue. So,
what are your guys' thoughts?
I started MUN about 3 to 4 years ago, and before that, you take the newspaper and the news pretty lightly because you're pretty much in your own head and trying to understand your own life. But after you go to an MUN conference and you see what happens when a problem, even in a crisis situation, what happens on a global stage, how do countries deal with it, how can you deal with it? Because it's very easy to have a singular view and to say, okay, bomb that person. But then, you need to think about the 5 countries surrounding it. Okay, how are they going to respond? Do I have to give them something? How do I actually achieve what I want to achieve? So you need to, so you kind of understand your country's place not just in the entire world but even in its surroundings. So that tends to give you a lot of perspective. So whenever you see a global problem arising, you will tend to think of a solution differently as an MUN delegate. If you were not an MUN delegate, you would have a very singular approach. As an MUN delegate, your thought process becomes a lot wider because you start accommodating what would actually happen in the UN if this issue was raised.
So you have like different perspectives.
So you look at it really differently. So that actually helps you become a global citizen because you're not just looking at the problem, which is a lot easier because we have the internet and we have ways to find out what the problem is. But you tend to think of a solution which can actually be implemented.
Right. So
that makes it.
I guess MUN is a very beautiful and a very important exercise that people need for them to have broader perspectives and better understanding of global politics. But if you had to personally come up with a list, top 5 reasons why everyone should do MUN at least once in their lifetime, what would it be? I'll start with you, Anna.
I think to keep people aware of what's going around, and because especially when, okay, let me just give an example of people living in the same country throughout their lives, and they're just in the same environment, and if there's any beef going on with another country, they would generalize and hate everyone else in that country. I'll give an example of India and Pakistan.
Right.
So people who have lived in and never actually stepped out and interacted with international people from actually that country or different countries, they're very opinionated. Like they don't know, they'll just hate you. All they know is like hate, or they did this and they did that. So I think it's important for them to know like all aspects, like all sides, because there are all sides to like every country and every story. And like if there's an Indian living here or an African living here, they would have a different opinion because they're interacting with those people. So they would actually know that okay, not all of them are the same. There are different people everywhere. So.
What would be your personal reason like you would recommend somebody to do MUN at least once in their lifetime?
So I've seen the past years like in terms of how delegates in UN, they have good policy making skills, but then sometimes they might have negative impact on their country or the other countries. So I feel like students or anyone interested in doing MUN, they need to know like the effective ways of policy making, not just strategically like military wise, but also like how the way of living, everything in all different angles. How you come up with policies, that needs to be important. So they need to have that knowledge of policy making skills.
Right. So what would you recommend MUN most of all?
Oh, why did I recommend MUN? Free food.
I agree. Yeah, I really agree with that.
Free food, and then you can
You get to
go there, take like really good pictures of yourself and post them on social media. Garner like a lot of likes. I got like 230 likes as of yet.
Okay.
This is the time when
And well, and there are also like a lot of social events. Okay, the actual reason why MUN is really cool is you get to meet a lot of people. The more international the event is, you meet people from a lot of nationalities. Like the Geneva thing, I met people from all over the world, and I made like such good friendship with them. Like it's once in a lifetime opportunity. Okay, not only people, you also like meet world leaders. Like we met the World Bank president, we met the head of WHO over there, and we also met the person who works in the disaster relief management, and I kind of like managed to impress her with my engineering skills. She actually took note. For example, she was talking about the situation in Haiti. You guys know what happened in Haiti, the earthquake and the hurricane and stuff. So here's a problem which I'll pose to you people. Suppose Haiti is an earthquake-prone country. Okay, so for an earthquake-prone zone, you should have like buildings which are of light material, right?
Right.
So that if the earthquake happens, then if the building falls on them, like people don't die. But Haiti is also prone to hurricanes.
Right.
So if there's light material, and if it will get blown away easily, not when it will get blown away, and if people like walking and stuff, and the material like a thatched roof comes flying, that hurricane, it just hits a person at the speeds of like 130, 230 miles per hour. So it's like instant death. So what would you do for that thing?
Right. I don't know. That's really complicated.
That's engineering.
That's
Let's not get there.
engineering.
Let's not-
So what I suggested was for once I used my engineering skills in a conference which has like a lot of PG and PhD students. See, the thing with international affairs and laws, they talk but they don't have the problem solving skills. Sorry people, I'll just don't hunt me afterwards. So what I suggested to them is you know how buildings fall during an earthquake, there's a phenomenon called resonance. So basically build structures out of lightweight materials which are also well anchored to the ground, but their natural frequency is very high, so that at the times of earthquake, the frequency caused by the seismic waves of the earthquake don't match to the natural frequency of the structure.
Right.
If the frequency matches, then resonance happens and the structure collapses. So thus you prevent the building collapse. And what about hurricanes is basically you build the structure in a dome-shaped way, so that the air resistance is much lower, and the flow of air over that building is of laminar type rather than the turbulent type.
Right.
Thus, essentially solving both the problems.
Now,
And I was happy.
probably leaving the
Sorry,
engineering part behind.
I was happy that she actually took note of this thing. So MUN gives you opportunities like this.
That's great, because I guess the biggest, I think the number one issue usually people in general, like normal citizens, everyday citizens, have with like diplomacy / politicians in general is that they are they're pretty much away from reality, the reality of everyday life. You are able to bring your reality and your experience in engineering into this.
Architects here too.
Oh.
Hello.
Like that was a great example of how you used your skills as an engineering student. How about you guys when it comes to architecture or like business? How would you bring into like MUN situations?
Actually, it depends on the topic. We haven't really gotten the topic so far.
Most important would be like environmental issues and even planning policy, like in cities and region.
Urban.
Yeah.
Architecture also has a lot to do with providing everyone a home and giving them spaces which they can experience and which they can live in. So if there's a world crisis, you need to actually house all of those people. If they're refugees, you need to give them a space to live. And it doesn't have to be a dingy hole. You need to give them a proper space to live. There needs to be space for each and every function. So when I hear of a refugee crisis, my first thing which I'll think about is, okay, where will all of those refugees go? How much space will be required? So according to that spatial requirement, I can appeal to countries to, okay, you know what? You need to give this area of your country. You need to give this area of your country. So the advantage of having a different major than political science or everything is that, as Asrar mentioned, that you can use your expertise and you can use your tiny experiences which you've had before into affecting something which is happening at a global stage.
So the core of architecture in today's world is sustainability. That's the most important factor you need to consider.
Global warming.
Yeah, so we need to, so as architects and designers, we need to consider, let's say, now that there's increasing global population, and then there's also high rise of food wastage, and then there's on one side of the world, people are wasting our food, and on the other side, they're starving. They don't have access to even one meal a day. So how we as architects need to design, design places where even if you say, let's say, sustainable landscapes, how are you going to grow sustainable food for which will be, which everyone can have access to it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like architecture is not just about buildings. It's spaces and interiors, and also it has to do with furnitures. Like I was a fashion student before I came to architecture, so we had to design a product for refugees. Our topic was refugees, and we designed this bed thing, which was called Haven, and this was a foldable and a carryable, like according to the way that it could, when it would open up, it would actually open up into 5 beds. So considering it's not just about furniture or like buildings and exteriors, it's everything. Like it has everything to do with living and human in general.
I think that helps us give a human touch to whatever decisions we're making.
Right.
Because I think that I faced that whenever I was making decisions or whenever I was providing clauses for resolutions and everything, because I'm so used to thinking of each and every final user when I'm designing something, that kind of attribute helped me in making those decisions which I was making for the resolution.
Right. One usual issue that people in MUN or any sort of a diplomatic situation face is that often arguments tend to go in circles. And it often happens a lot in MUN, I believe, and sometimes you have to pull the brakes and tell people stop, and you have to bring it.
No, I think they said some really good things, like all the positive things that you can do at the UN. But then obviously it's an imperfect world, and I think that's where the business student comes in.
Right.
Because we actually have to see what's actually viable out of all the options that they just mentioned. Okay, everything's viable, but is it affordable to what she's making?
Exactly.
Is what he's planning to do, is it is there enough infrastructure to actually accommodate such a building to be constructed in Haiti? So all these things have to be taken into consideration, which a business student does. And the other way, I'm sure. And then the other notion that we also take into play is that whenever we create a policy of any sort that you're recommending, is that how will businesses try to exploit it? Because businesses are amoral. They don't consider the repercussions that it might have on the public. It's always the notion how can I benefit from there being refugees in my country? How can I benefit by having lower taxes having lower tax havens? It's always from that perspective of making money, and that doesn't necessarily always mean that's going to benefit society. And you have to look at the perspective of how do I convince businesses to do the right thing, which I think comes back to, and about going around in circles. The thing is, as I mentioned, probably while I said about how to do the research, some will divert the topic, some will essentially, as Khan said, he had to completely change the subject of the debate. These are things that happen even in the current UN. The world's not perfect, as I mentioned. There are other there are business interests, there are political interests, there are other major agendas from a lot of different groups that are all that have all come into this one block and are represented by different countries. And for them to come to an agreement as it is really hard. The fact that we've made the amount of traction they have made is significant. The amount of effort that also the World Health Organization has done, even some of the help that the World Bank has done for developing countries is significant. And just going back to the point, the reason why I do this at the end of the day is because I want people, all of these folk, to understand the consequences, because I've done a lot of social work in my life. I have also first-hand experience of war. So I understand the consequences when when somebody says, oh, there's war, or there is a genocide or anything happening in a particular country, because I've seen it with my own eyes. I can see the effect it has on society and people. So it's I find it really important to convince people to join the event so they understand what's actually happening and the actual consequences of it.
Adding to the arguments being beating around the bush and stuff, you might have recently read about Trump's decision to move the US embassy to Jerusalem.
Yes.
And it can't be done because Jerusalem is UN essentially declared that Jerusalem, neither Israel nor Palestine, has sovereignty. It's for all the countries in the world. And if United States decides to move its embassy, it's essentially recognizing the sovereignty of Israel over there. So when United States decided to do that, and a lot of countries decided to vote against it, and its speaker Nikki Haley, so drunk on power, literally gave a speech which is not even an indirect threat, but a direct threat